Hello, and welcome back to the Bring Your Big Energy podcast. I have Peggy Haymes with me today. So, question for the audience. This is my new thing, Peggy. I want to just ask the audience something as I'm opening the show. And the question today for everyone to think about that is on their mind, or maybe that they haven't thought about recently, is have you ever grieved something that no one else seemed to recognize? So we often think grief is only about losing someone we love, which is obviously a big deal. But what if grief also shows up in the loss of a relationship, a dream, or health? I mean, someone that's gone through this, like my body, I grieve a body that didn't get me where I thought it should get me, right? Our identity, we switch our identities a lot, or just a life that we imagine that we would have had by now. I should be doing by now. So today's guest, Peggy, has spent decades helping people navigate grief, both through her professional work and her own deeply felt and lived personal experiences. And she wants to remind us that grief isn't something that you get over. For those not watching, I'm doing air quotes. But something that we learn to move through with courage and compassion and hope. So today we're talking about what grief really looks like. We're putting it out there, folks. We're giving it some arms and some legs, and we're opening the conversation because there's no right way to experience it. There's no rule book, and how even our deepest losses can actually become catalysts for healing and growth, which, as you all know, which is what this whole show, seasons 1 through 3, have been all about, is how do we use the hardest things to build the tools to move forward in the best way possible into this new life. So with that, before we dive into the spark process, which is the question framework I always use, Peggy, I always just ask every guest to just start out by sharing with us, what was your intensity point or that defining moment or season that forever changed your trajectory and brought you into the work that you're doing now?
Thank you. It's a great question. I was in my early adulthood, getting started in my career, and things were going along pretty well, except I knew I had this smidgen of self-esteem problem. So I said, well, I'll get into therapy, maybe 6 weeks, and I'll be done. Just pump it up. And a year later, I was still in therapy, and because things needed to be untangled, but I didn't expect what really got untangled, which was out of the blue, reading a book I had read before, and it triggered a flashback for me. First flashback I'd ever had. I'd always told people that my childhood had been idyllic, and there were parts of it that were. I'm going to be really clear about that. There were parts that were, but there's this other part that I had locked away deep inside because it was too much to carry, which as a child, I was horrifically abused by someone outside of my family. And so that was it turned my life upside down. I had to reconfigure what is my life? Who am I? What has my life been? And I spent, I think, the bulk of the next year, the therapy was like my number one job. I'd had some opportunities to be on boards of new organizations, and I had to pull away from that and just focus on these memories that were coming up fast and furious now. What do I do with these? And so yeah, I found myself at a point where this really great career track had come to a hard stop, and I was underemployed. I was going back to school to get my counseling degree, but I just felt so lost. And that became a defining experience that has really in good and hard ways changed the rest of my life.
Wow. And it's because grief is what you talk about most. What do you feel like you grieved through that process?
I actually got connected with the grief of it. I was carrying a lot of grief in my body because when I got a massage, they press on one spot on my back, I would just start weeping, even if I'd been happy walking in. But I went to a workshop for adult survivors of child abuse, and it was led by people who had worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross with their grief workshops all over the world. And it was there that I realized, wait, I am grieving. I'm grieving the safe childhood I didn't have. I'm grieving what healing is costing me, both in terms of time and energy and money. I'm grieving that I'm having to rewrite my life story. And there's so many things that I could start looking back and going, oh, that might have been different had I not been carrying these heavy memories inside.
Yeah, because it gets in the way of the things that matter more and most, right? That are like living your life and hopes and dreams and all of that. But it's sort of like I'm picturing for you, like like a blockage that ends up happening, right? That doesn't help you to be able to stimulate all of those and foster an environment for that growth. So as we talk about self-reflection, so you've experienced grief in so many different forms throughout your life. When did you first reflect and realize that grief wasn't something to fix, but something to actually understand?
It's why I have to go back to that first workshop I went to. It was 5 days, residential, intense, and they were really clear they were not there to fix us, and we would not go home with everything magically resolved. But it was about getting the tools and getting the permission to do what we needed to do to express our grief. I've learned that grief is like a river. It needs some banks so that it can flow through us. And that river flows for the rest of our lives. Even with grief we have, quote, resolved, it can come back up. My mother was in her 80s, and one day out of the blue, she said, I miss my daddy. Now, my grandfather had been gone probably for 60 years at that point. But there was that missing, that moment of grief. So as I began doing that work, that's where it really started coming home for me. Of grief is something we do and we live with, and in some ways it's what we dance with.
Say more there, something we dance with.
It can change the steps that we're taking. It can lead us in different directions. And sometimes it's like, you're on a dance and somebody taps you on the shoulder and cuts in. Sometimes it cuts in. And we just have to go with where it's going in that moment. People feel like I have failed if I have had this loss and I have appropriately grieved it and I've done all the things, but it's going to come back up. There's this ebb and flow. And the fact that it comes back up doesn't mean we've done anything wrong.
So what do you go on to do then? You have this revelation, you go to the workshops, and then you build the purpose of saying like, okay, somewhere along the way, your own experiences became the foundation of the work that you do. Talk us through what that story looked like.
So after my first workshop, I went back the next year to do another piece of work. Now, I will confess that driving to that workshop, I was going down the highway and I was telling myself, yeah, I registered. I paid my money, but they can't make me go. They can't make me do this.
Like, joke's on them, right?
Yeah, joke's on them. I'm not going to show up for this. And now that I know what's going to happen, grief is hard work sometimes. But I did show up and I did more hard work. And at the end of the workshop, I was talking with Sharon, the leader. And by this time, I was back in school. And she said, maybe when you finish your counseling degree, you'll come and do our training and staff with us. Now, these were people who had worked with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in her workshops all over the world. South Africa, Ireland, all over the country.
For those of us that don't know who she is, I know she's probably a legend in your world. Tell us real quick who she is.
Kubler-Ross was the person who, more than any other, opened the door to our listening to grief and understanding grief. She was a doctor, and she began listening to her dying patients. And it was so phenomenal that she wound up developing these workshops as a way where she could reach more and more people. Before her work, dying patients were put at the end of the hallway so that doctors would not have to walk past their failures, because that's how they saw it. So she did that. She helped get hospice movement started in this country. Just her book on death and dying revolutionized the way that we look at grief.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so there's these very esteemed, which now end up being colleagues, but at the time, like, wow, these people are the people, and they're asking me to come back. So what did that journey look like? Clearly, they saw something in you that you'd be great at this.
Well, they did. And it was such an affirmation. And it was hard work, too. I learned and grew so much because it was such an intense container. Part of it was, twice a year we do workshops in North Carolina and California. It was the intense work with participants, but also sitting around at night staff meeting and talking with them about the work. Yeah, that was like my doctoral program in grief, getting to see them in action and also getting to talk with them about the work and how it manifested and what grief meant and what grief was and wasn't. And I'll admit that the more comfortable I got in that setting, the more I started thinking, well, yeah, everybody knows this. I mean, this is no big revelation. But then I started my counseling practice and started working with people. And I realized, oh, wait a minute, everybody doesn't know this. And people are really struggling because they can't give themselves permission to deeply grieve the death of their cat or their dog or their marriage, or they had a parent die and they are not grieving because the parent was an abusive, horrible person. But then they feel guilty because you're supposed to grieve. So I don't know, the opportunities started coming. And one of the things I did with that was I created an 8-week curriculum for churches to use in a small grief group called Navigating Griefland, because grief's like being in a foreign country. And what I did with that was just as we're talking about, naming that grief isn't always the death of a person or even a pet. There's so many different dimensions, and sometimes it's the loss of a childhood. And this is such a gratifying thing. I heard back from a pastor who had done a small group in her church, and she said 80%, it was all women, 80% of the women in the group were able to share that they were survivors of child sexual abuse. And that was part of their grief. And I thought, yes, this is my work, because those women are not going to feel alone anymore.
Yes, yes. And how do you convince people? Because you painted this picture, like it's such a good visual of like the patients being moved to the end of the hallway if they're not doing well because the doctors don't want that fear of the feeling of failure or the feeling of grief, which is probably pretty human, sad, but pretty human. So how do you convince people to walk down that hallway and say, look, this is something I'm going to get curious about?
There will be some people who will never do that. And I think you just have to accept people have the right to say, nope, not going to go there. But for other people, it's an invitation. One time I called Sharon, the workshop leader, and I was in the middle of my own stuff. And I said, Sharon, I don't like where I am right now. I don't like having to deal with this stuff. And she said, yes. And she was very kind about it, but very firm. She said, yes, but this is where you are. What are you going to do now? So part of it is the reality of whatever the situation is, this is where you are. And you're the one who gets to decide what to do with it. Sometimes people will come in 10, 20, 30, even 40 years later. Either they were not ready to grieve or they didn't have the luxury of grieving when the loss happened because they had to take care of other people. I think we just offer the invitation, and sometimes it has to be offered repeatedly, and sometimes to gentle confrontation of how's your life right now? Yeah. Don't you want something different than what you have right now? Right now, it's kind of black and white. When we say we're not going to feel the difficult feelings, it's like the paper guide in my printer. We push in from one side, the other side gets pushed in too. So if we're going to cut off those painful, difficult feelings, what happens is we diminish our joy and our happiness, because feelings, they're a package deal.
Yeah, the highs, the lows, the stars to have the sun, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so if someone's listening right now and they're like, wow, I didn't even realize I was grieving until I'm listening to this conversation with Peggy and Stacey, like what are like the 2 or 3 questions they should be asking themselves?
Journaling is such a great tool of just sitting and writing and dumping out. And you can do like just the same sentence over and over again. I feel sad because, and there's just write what comes. Name the grief, no matter how, quote, silly it feels. My dad had lung disease, and he told my brother one of the saddest days of his life was when he had to clean out his golf locker and couldn't play golf anymore. And so people go, oh, well, that's silly. That's just a game. No, it wasn't just a game for them. So you can also write out, that voice in your head that's going, oh, that's silly. Don't be stupid, all of the stuff, and then answer it and let yourself be honest. And you can ask, well, what does it mean? What difference does it make for me if I allow myself to claim this grief? What is different for me? How might I heal this? What is the importance of this for me? And how might I reach out to someone who can help me with this? And, it may be 2 or 3 sessions with a therapist. It may be finding the right book that guides you. It may be the right podcast to help you start thinking about, this is a loss for me. Now, what do I do with it?
Yes, that's so good. And I love this invitation to go deeper as a coach, not a therapist, but as a coach, this is a place that I go very often with my clients is what's the worst case scenario? Like, okay, then what? then what happens? Then what happens? Then what happens, right? Or it's really not about this thing. It's like there's lots of levels that are deeper potentially that it could be about. So, one of the things that I really love and admire about you is your perspective that you can challenge misconceptions about grief. And so, part of that is abandoning things, right? And so, what beliefs or expectations about grief have you had to let go of? What are some of the beliefs or expectations of grief that you've had to let go of?
I had to let go that I would be finished, that I can get it done and it's all gonna be done, and I'm never ever gonna have to deal with any of this stuff again. And I also had to let go of the word should. I should be feeling this, or I shouldn't be feeling this. What I've learned is our feelings are like the dashboard lights on a car. They're giving us information, and there's no good feeling or bad feeling. There's easy feelings or painful feelings, but we're not wrong for what we feel.
Yes. Yes, we're allowed. We have permission to feel. And that's one of the other things that I remember we talked in our first conversation is you said there's no like national ranking of grief. There's not Stacey's heart is harder than Peggy's heart or her grief should be less or more. Like to talk through what you mean by that.
So, intuitively, we know that some losses just hit harder and sit harder. As we're recording this, it's the birthday of a young man I watched grow up who was killed in Iraq. And so I know this is a hard day for his parents and friends and all of us who loved him are remembering him. If your house burns down in a fire, that is different from, gosh, I lost power for a couple of hours. But what we do is sometimes we think, well, because my situation isn't as hard as someone else's situation, my situation doesn't count. Towards the end of his life, my dad had dementia, and there were so many gifts I had with that he was already in a retirement community. He could go seamlessly into memory care. I didn't have to worry about, is he going to wander off? All the things. So sometimes I would kind of beat myself up and say, this shouldn't be so hard. But it was still hard because it was my dad.
Yeah.
And I was losing my dad in a very personal way. So we can recognize that some things are just universally so very hard. That doesn't mean that the thing that's hard for you doesn't get to be hard for you. You're not being a drama queen because it's hard for you.
Yeah, that's such a gift, and I hope people take that away. I really do, because people have different thresholds for pain, right?
Mhm.
That's allowed. So why not have different levels of grief and things that are really something that are grieving to one person, another person might be like, it's not that deep, as my teenagers say. But that's okay because you're allowed what you're allowed. So, and I think that this is where grief's an interesting one for me. So in my Spark process, the R is all about results or success or what does success look like. But I don't think this is something that you can say, like, this is what success looks like at the end of my grief journey. And I know you've said, like, you can't flunk grief, but how do you know that you're on the right path? Or how do you know how much time to give yourself? Or how do you know how much therapy? Like, how do you measure if you're doing okay with grief?
So, first of all, it's to know, as you said, it's not a straight line. It's not if you're feeling really good one day and not so good the next. It doesn't mean that, oh gosh, I'm flunking it. I'm going back. The best illustration I've heard it from a colleague many years ago who had a friend who'd lost a child, and this person said, "My child's death opened up this huge hole in my heart. The hole hasn't gone away. What's happened is my heart has gotten bigger, so that the hole isn't the only thing that's there." So in the beginning, grief can be all consuming. Like I was talking about, that first year, it was almost all I thought about. Part of healing is our lives get bigger and we have other things in our life. And sometimes we come out of it, as I did, with another purpose in our life. Or the purpose may be, I want to live richly and authentically. This is the meaning I'm taking from this. David Kessler, who's a grief expert who's written some wonderful books, talks about the sixth stage of grief. Kubler-Ross had 5 stages. He said the sixth stage is meaning. And what is the meaning in this? And what do I do? How do I live my life, the rest of my life, with the reality of this grief? Last summer, about a year ago, I had a really horrible month of August in which one of my dearest friends, one of my workshop colleagues, who I called my heart sister, even though she was old enough to be my mother, got the news that she was dying. Not unexpected, in her 90s, but still, she was close to my heart. And then the vet told me that my dog's x-rays were very bad. So as I was doing all the tests and scans, my friend Connie was dying. Connie died one day, and 6 days later, I had to put my dog down. Now, that was just enormous grief, and I wept for a long time with that. A couple of weeks ago, I was having my yearly checkup with my doctor, and I told her, man, that was a rough year. And as I was telling her about my friend and my dog, I really became tearful, and I realized I was feeling kind of vulnerable there. That doesn't mean that I haven't grieved. That doesn't mean I haven't made progress. It means in that moment, something really touched that tender place of my heart. And my progress was shown in that I could have that little wavelet of feeling, that small wave of feeling, and then move on from it. It didn't take up the rest of the day or the week or the month or whatever.
It shortens that time period potentially of which you're working through it, but it doesn't mean it's never going to show
It,
up
it
again.
means it means that we can dip back into it and come out without being completely submerged.
So, Peggy, so much of the work I do is on transformation and people reinventing themselves and doing legacy careers and, having these intensity points where their life has been altered in such a large way that their perspective will never be the same. And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting that you say is like death over an identity, death over where I should be right now, death over, connections or relationships. So what would you say to someone listening who's it's not about death for them, an actual dying pet or beloved human or anything like that. It's the death of maybe that dream. What would you say to them and what would you ask them to get curious about as they try to go through the process on that?
I would say first to allow yourself to be honest that yes, you're feeling this. I mean, we have this thing of, well, I don't want to succumb to self-pity, but sometimes we deserve that. The the kindness of it of I am so sorry that happened. I'm so sorry you didn't get that life you wanted to have. I'm at the age now where a lot of people I was in school with are retiring. And I have no interest in doing that because I love my work. But it's that moment of, wow, my life could have looked so much different. So the thing to get curious about is what do you do with this new shape of life? Where's the calling? Where's the work? Where's the opportunity? Where's the gift? I had when I was bemoaning one day with a friend that my life looked nothing like I expected it to. And they said, but look at what you've done. No, it's not what you expected. And that's a loss. And it's a both and. Yes, we grieve what we wanted and what we planned. And then we decide, well, as my friend Sharon said, what are you going to do now?
I love that. I love, yes, and because it doesn't take away the fact that something happened or that it was really super crappy, right? I got breast cancer the second time when I was finishing this book and going on a 10-city tour, like
Oof.
literally, like who has that happen? And I could sit around and cry about it, or I could try to process it and work through it. And it definitely took me some time, but I definitely felt myself being in the yes and like, yes, this sucks. And how does this give me the tools to help other people who might feel alone and not know where to get help or advice on how to navigate this process that is such a hard one to navigate with so many like life altering decisions. So I love that. Yeah, that yes and. What do you think is one of the most things that is the biggest like misconception about grief?
I mean, I keep coming back to the fact that we should do it a certain way. Kubler-Ross it gave us a great gift in her work, but unfortunately, in our culture, we've taken that work and made it like a series of stair steps that you check off. Okay, I have felt anger, done with that. Yeah, I have felt sadness, done with that. And Lamont said it was like the wheel on Wheel of Fortune. It spins around, and we can jump from one feeling to another. Actually, Elizabeth at the end of her life was really outdone. She was very frustrated that they had taken what she just saw in different hospital rooms. People are reacting differently. How do I conceptualize this? And had made it into stair steps that you check off one after the other. The other thing, and I'm not sure this is exactly to your question, but it's related. I think is people get so judgy about their grief and somebody else's grief.
Yeah.
Sometimes, like, for example, losing a parent. For some people, it is a crushing loss, devastating. For other people, it is a sense of relief. Now, it may be a relief because they've had dementia for 15 years and they lost their person a long time ago. Or it may be relief because they were not nice people. And nobody knows this, but they were not nice people to their kids. And so people feel like they have to have this performative grief when really they're not sad at all. And that's a terrible bind to be with when everybody's in the world going, "Oh, that must be so hard for you." And inside you're going, "Well, not really." But people we judge our own selves. And it's like what I was saying before with the shoulds. And I'm not working fast enough. I should be further along. I shouldn't have to deal with this. And that judge is just so completely not helpful.
How do you get the judge out of there?
Sometimes you write an eviction notice
I like that.
that you are no longer allowed. Sometimes I'll have clients make them into like a cartoon character, give them a name. So when we give like a part of ourselves a name, it takes it outside of ourselves and we can talk back. It's like, yeah, no, not listening to you. You're not allowed. We have to trust ourselves that wherever we are in this moment, this is where we are. And we may be doing brilliantly well. And we may be struggling with something we thought we put behind us a long time ago. But if I could say one thing to your listeners, it would be to be gentle with yourself. I mean, whatever you've been through, that's hard enough. Be gentle. Be as kind to yourself as you would be to your very best friend whom you love.
That's so good. Yeah, I've heard the saying before, like, the negative voices in your head, would you talk to your best friend that way? And likely not. And so this
Yeah.
invitation of grief is normal and it's good to process, but the judgment piece of it, that's the piece to let go of and hang on to this like kind of grace of giving yourself that peace and that grace of like, I'm gonna need to be here in a minute. Cause boy, it sure is easier to walk down the hall, this end of the hallway, right? And not
Yeah.
process it because it is work. You know, as we say the same thing with coaching, again, not therapy, but coaching's work. You're gonna need to put work in. Just like counseling, all of those pieces are work because it does make you kind of put that mirror back in your face and reflect. So what as we're almost closing out here, Peggy, what are like some of the best tools that you would give our listeners if they're processing a difficult season? Like what are some of the tools you would invite them to take a peek at?
The first is soft things, soft clothes, soft blankets and quilts to wrap yourself in, soft words for yourself. In grief, we have that need to wrap up in something. And there's a reason why, like, we don't make children's clothes out of scratchy wool. You know, we want it to be soft. So give yourself the things that you just feel like you're wrapped up in. Another tool is doing something physical. When my dad was in hospice, I'd spend the night with him, come home at breakfast, and I built a retaining wall in my backyard because I needed heavy work. I needed literally concrete work. And it was part of getting the energy of the grief out. I was so helpless sitting by his bedside. I could come home and dang it, I could build that wall. So sometimes it may be doing yard work and jerking those weeds out. And writing or drawing or dancing or singing, whatever works for you. Now, a lot of people have an issue with journaling because they've used it like a diet where you have to do it every day. And if you miss a day, then there's no point in going on. You can do it on an as needed basis and just write what you feel. Or write all the way down the left side of the page, I feel something, or I'm grieving because, or wherever you want to start, and then go back and start at the top on the right-hand side and just write what comes. And what happens is what comes out, stream of consciousness towards the bottom of the page, are things you didn't realize was going on for you. Also, if you are blessed to have this kind of friend or group or connection, someone who can sit and hear the reality of where you are without trying to fix you.
If you're someone holding space on the other side, how do you do that well?
First, you pay attention to your own grief, your own losses, your own stuff that's rumbling around inside. And as many of us do, have this inner belief that you need to fix someone, you got to leave that to the side and just focus on being present. Over and over, grieving people have told me the most important thing for them was someone who could hear them without talking about your experience. Well, that reminds me of when my father died,
Yes.
who could just be there and say, I am so sorry.
Smiling because there's a thing in coaching, we call it presence, and that's exactly what it is. Like, get out, like if I'm your coach, like, Stacey, get out of Peggy's story. It's not about you, it's about Peggy and where she's gonna go, not assuming, but just and removing all of your self stuff. And I do think listening to someone, I teach an entire class on listening, an entire NBA, EMBA level class on effective listening and powerful questions because we're so bad at it because for so many reasons and not in a judgy way, but one of the main things is we love people. We want to make it better for them. We want the pain to go away. And this is why I love coaching. Again, not an ad for coaching, but one of my favorite things. And this is available for all of us to do for free right now with anyone that we love is how can I support you? I truly believe that listening is the kindest thing and it feels so good. And people walk away going, thanks for just listening to me. And so I do think that is a powerful gift for our listeners out there today to really contemplate like, am I listening to have my next question get in there? Am I listening to give my perspective? Am I listening to try to fix? Or am I listening just to understand and support? Or maybe not even understand, but just to support this person and where they're at today.
That's such a great question. How might I support you?
Yes.
And if they say, I don't know, okay, I'm just going to be here with you. You do what you need to do.
Peggy, this has been so helpful. And what I love about you too is like just getting the conversation out there. It doesn't have to be sad and we don't have to turn away from it. Well, let's lean into it and discover and get curious. And so, if someone listening or watching today, as we part ways, what do you want them to take with them?
Grief simply means that someone or something has mattered to us. And the only way to avoid grief is to avoid being connected or loving anyone or anything in this life, which to me, that's the greatest loss of all, is to live our lives and not have those connections.
It's beautiful. Thank you. And such a good reminder. Peggy, where can people find out about you and the work that you're doing and all that good stuff?
They can find me at peggyhaymes.com, and that's Haymes. If folks are interested in workshops, there's one I know that is continuing on the same kind of work, more general grief workshop, and that's at edgebrook.org, and they can go there and find out about that. Yeah, I do lots of different things, and so feel free to reach out. They are mostly in person. I'm in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. And I have done them. I'm doing a grief workshop in Aiken, South Carolina this fall.
And then do you offer one-on-one like grief counseling services that are virtual at chance by for anyone watching?
Yes, I have to have a conversation, whether it's a coaching or a counseling situation. Counseling, I'm licensed in North Carolina and Florida, but I'll be glad to talk with anyone about what they need and how I might help them find that.
Thank
That's
you,
right.
Peggy, so much for reminding us that grief isn't a problem to solve. It's not a test to pass. It's part of being human. It means you care. It means you love things. And I think you've given so many people permission today to be a little kinder to themselves, a little bit more compassionate. And for everyone listening, if this conversation has touched your heart, please share it with someone that you feel like needs it. I can think of a few people in my life right now who really need Peggy's wisdom. And so I know I'll be sharing this. But thank you again for all of the work that you're doing, Peggy. And it's brave, courageous work. And we're just eternally grateful for you coming on the show today.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This has been great.